President Obama's approval ratings are suffering from multiple crises at home and especially overseas. A new Fox News poll shows 56% of Americans disapprove of his handling of foreign policy. But he's not the only one getting flack for his stance on all things abroad. Disapproval is crossing party lines. Texas Governor Rick Perry and Kentucky Senator Rand Paul are trading blows over the growing threat from ISIS and what the U.S. should do about it in Iraq. Perry and Paul are considered early contenders for the Republican presidential nomination. So is this conflict a preview of 2016? Wall Street Journal Deputy Editor Dan Henninger and Editorial Board member Matt Kaminsky are back with us. So, Dan, I want you to explain a paradox for me. On the one hand, you heard Barack Obama's approval ratings way down on foreign policy. And yet, if you ask the American public what to do about specific cases, Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, always say, don't intervene. Don't get involved. Yet Obama's being punished because of his detachment on foreign policy. How do you explain that seeming contradiction?
I think the explanation is pretty straightforward, Paul. They don't want to get involved because they've been spending the past 5 years watching Barack Obama basically not handle foreign policy. I mean, what you're suggesting is that if we were to commit to Ukraine or to the Middle East, would you want to follow Barack Obama? And if he's such an uncertain trumpet, I think, unfortunately, it's a very rational decision on the part of the American people to want to step back at this point. I mean, you're talking about presidential leadership.
But is that fair? I mean, aren't they also tired of Iraq and tired of Afghanistan?
You know, Paul, one poll that jumped out at me after the Islamic State in Iraq took over a third of Iraq in about 7 days. The Washington Post asked people, should we do something? 44% said we should commit airstrikes against them. 58% of Republicans said we should, and 44% of Democrats said we should hit ISIS. I think there is still an instinct on the part of the American people when they see a serious problem to act if they are properly led. But it is not the job of the American people to create American foreign policy. That job falls to the White House.
I would also put it a little differently, Matt. I think President Obama spent 5 years telling people, the American people, there are really only two options on foreign policy. One is you intervene militarily, full force, like Iraq and Afghanistan, or you do nothing. With all of the things you can do in between, like forging alliances, like arming surrogates, for example, in Syria, like putting together coalitions, like economic and diplomatic pressure, that sort of thing he hasn't explained adequately to the public about the U.S. and about U.S. interests in the world.
But also, remember how he won this office. He won as the anti-war president, the anti-Iraq president. The message did not change 2 years ago when he beat Mitt Romney. So he himself has been sort of stuck in 2008 in this sort of endless loop. I think there's a legitimate point about war fatigue. You know, it took us 20 years to get over Vietnam, and that handicapped us from doing anything in the Balkans in the 90s. But I think what people are seeing now, and I think where the mood is shifting, is they're seeing it's a very mad world out there, or some say a Mad Max world. You know, sort of instability all over the place, and things are not going well. And that's why he has such low marks for foreign policy. I think Americans see it, that things are going terribly in a terrible direction, and more terrible things will keep happening. That's why you will have, I think, more support for an activist president, and they will want someone.
Well, let's talk about that alternative, the Republican debate on foreign policy, Rick Perry versus Rand Paul. Rand Paul has, I think, non-interventionist instincts, to put it kindly. Some would say isolationist. That's the world he comes out of, with the exception perhaps of Israel. Rick Perry saying you can't do that. What do you make of this debate?
Well, I think the interesting figure here is Rick Perry. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think if the isolationism were real, Rick Perry would be peddling it.
Why do you say
Political
that?
ambition has its uses.
You mean if the real sentiment of the American people were isolationist, he would be playing to it too?
Yeah, Rick Perry is a politician, and I think that if he thought it was real, that he would be doing it. And as far as Rand Paul goes, this is a guy who is basically a rookie running for the presidency of the United States, and he has to differentiate himself. And if you look at his campaign, he's been putting together his own coalition of the ascendant, as they say about Obama. It's techies, it's urban sophisticates, it's isolationists. He's got an program for minorities now. He's running his own campaign, and the isolationist strain is part of that. But I do not think it reflects sentiment inside the Republican Party.
Who do you think has the better pulse on the mood within the Republican Party?
I think I agree with Dan that Rick Perry reflects more the mainstream view in the Republican Party and probably in the country as well, because Rand Paul is, like his dad, is an isolationist. But what's very telling is that Hillary Clinton is running a more hawkish, pseudo campaign on foreign policy. She's running to the right of Obama, and Rand Paul is running to the left of Obama. I'm not sure there's on foreign policy.
Where is she running to the right of Obama? Where she said, look, I would disagree with the president because she's associated with his policy?
No, but she said, she disagreed with the Syria policy that she was pushing for the U.S. to arm the rebels in the summer of 2012. Right. She has always sounded a bit more hawkish than Barack Obama, and I think that's been very telling. From the moment she left office, there were some select leaks about, positions she took inside the administration.
Quick question, Matt. If she gets the Democratic nomination and Rand Paul gets the Republican nomination, will she be the more hawkish candidate on foreign
without
policy?
a doubt. Yeah.
Without a doubt.
I think she has to watch her left. The left is going to want her to support Obama's left-wing foreign policy, and if she doesn't, I think they'll pull back from her. She's got a dilemma.
All right, guys, thanks. When we come back, could there be a break in the IRS targeting probe? New details on how backup tapes may lead investigators to Lois Lerner's infamous missing emails.